It is the hardest job for a commander of forces in combat. Just a day into his new assignment, the U.S. commanding general in Afghanistan announced that a U.S. service member was killed today in what is being described as an insider attack. Barbara Starr joins us now live from the Pentagon. Barbara, what do we know about the circumstances here?
Hi, Jim. Very early word coming out of Afghanistan that one service member was killed, another wounded in eastern Afghanistan in one of these so-called insider attacks. What that generally means is they believe the perpetrator was someone who was a member of Afghan security forces, or at least in an Afghan uniform at the time. No word on what happened to that alleged perpetrator. We are told the wounded member is in stable condition, and of course, they are now conducting next of kin notification on the man who was killed, and his name will be made public in the next 24 hours after that notification is completed. It comes at a very tough time for General Austin Scott Miller, first full day on the job under a lot of pressure to make progress in the fight against both the Taliban and ISIS in Afghanistan with the 15,000 U.S. forces he has on hand. Jim?
America's longest war. Americans are still dying there. We're getting confirmation of, I suppose, what you could call a victory there, the killing of the ISIS leader in Afghanistan. Put this into perspective. Of course, the Taliban still the primary adversary there, but ISIS had been building its presence.
ISIS has been over the months, and there is now a lot of focus in these areas of eastern Afghanistan where ISIS has taken hold. So they are now confirming that about a week ago they did kill the so-called leader of ISIS in Afghanistan. And I say so-called because this will be the third self-declared leader of the organization in that area that they have killed in the last 2 years. So what it underscores, of course, is U.S. forces consistently going after these people, these targets, when they can find them. Considered a very major and significant threat for U.S. forces to go after them, a top priority. Right now, as far as the Taliban goes, what the U.S. is hoping, and the emphasis, I think, is on hoping there can be some kind of political settlement with the Taliban, that somehow they can get to a ceasefire and somehow they can get them to the negotiating table. Jim?
Even as the Taliban is carrying more and more deadly attacks. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thanks very much. As we mentioned just a moment ago, there is a new commander of the NATO-led mission in Afghanistan. During a ceremony in Kabul, outgoing U.S. Army General John Nicholson handed off the mission's flag to incoming General Scott Miller, this just yesterday. Miller assuming the role as Afghanistan deals with terrorism, poverty, uncertainty heading into a new election cycle. Joining me to talk about this now is CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He served as Army Commanding General not only in Europe but also in Iraq in combat there. Thanks, General Hertling, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Jim.
General Miller, interesting bio because he was one of the first U.S. service members on the ground there after 9/11, so he's had experience there as long as America's longest war. To your knowledge, what does he bring to the conflict, and what particular challenges will he face?
Yeah, he was on the ground there 17 years ago, Jim. Scott Miller's a good special operator. He was one of the initial forces that went in. Probably, I think he was a major at the time, perhaps, maybe a lieutenant colonel. But you talk about a long war. You're seeing the evolution of rank structure, and the folks who were young men fighting this war when it first began to eliminate al-Qaeda from that particular country, is supported by the Taliban, is now back as the four-star general in charge. I think he's the 15th four-star in charge of the operation there, the NATO command and the U.S. command in that forces. His background, as I said, is a special operator. He's taking over from General Mick Nicholson, a good friend of mine, who's more of a conventional force guy, an infantryman who really knows Afghanistan as well, has been there 31 months in command of that force. Imagine that, almost 3 years without a day off, fighting that force, not only conducting the military operation, but also doing the things related to Afghan governance and economic means. So Mick is left yesterday during that change of command, and his statement in his change of command ceremony was pretty telling about what he sees as the future of the fight. Mm-hmm.
Well, it'd be amazing to think that he might command someone during his time there who wasn't born when the conflict began, as we're coming up on, as you said, coming up on 17 years. Taliban commanders there, they're now offering to talk to the government about peace, making peace, speaking about ISIS as their #1 enemy. Have a listen.
Our enemy is first ISIS and then government.
Now, this is a Taliban who just in the last few weeks have been a horrible assault in the city of Ghazni. They've been killing children in their schools. Is this really someone that the U.S. can sit down across from and believe they could reach a substantive agreement with?
Well, you have to pull people into peace talks. Certainly, that's part of the diplomatic effort. But Jim, you've hit it right on the head that this is duplicitous on the part of the Taliban. They, in fact, waited for the movement of U.S. and Afghan forces out of Ghazni province before they attempted their attacks there and tried to ambush many of the Afghan and U.S. forces, taking over a province that had been deserted because the forces had gone other places to fight ISIS-K, the Khorasan group, and as well as the Haqqani network. So, yeah, the Taliban are not to be trusted, but certainly they should be attempted to be brought in to determine the way ahead for Afghanistan if they are going to play a role. But truthfully, they think they have the upper hand. They may have a great deal of momentum on their side from that attack in the middle of August. But truthfully, you have to be wary both on the part of the Afghan government and the U.S. forces there, pulling them completely into the tent.
No question. General Mark Hertling, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jim.